Hello, and welcome to the Coolest Coast. I'm Tina Prigge, and I'm joined by my good friend, Kevin Sievert. We just had an amazing and productive and beautiful conversation, and I neglected to record the whole thing, so we're giving it another try.
Yes.
Kevin, how's it going? Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, absolutely. I'm great. How are you, Tina?
Good. You know, it is a hot mess in the world, and these are really emotional times. And so I
Mm-hmm.
feel like this is the right time. Thank you for sitting down to have like an honest, thoughtful, difficult conversation about the importance and the relevance of Black Lives Matter. And
Yeah.
if you wouldn't mind, let's unpack that a little bit. Can you tell me a little bit about it from your perspective, what you're experiencing?
Yeah, absolutely. So about like 2.5 weeks ago or so when the case of George Floyd went down, I honestly was having a very hard time unpacking that, especially as a Black man, because in that moment I had to kind of rationalize the world that I was living in my head and the physical world that I live in. And that was a very hard bridge for me to cross. For a while, I was pretty down about it. I remember staying up really late and watching the news about the protests, um, the the cases of the police officers involved, and I was just trying to like rationalize this new movement that we were in, and I never expected it to combust, I guess is the right word, as fast as it did. So experiencing those things all at once was really hard at first, but since then I've been lucky enough to unpack those things and open my mind a little bit to and find my voice in the matter, find out where I stand and how I can help better educate the people around me, which is not easy to do, but I found a way to do it, because I'm not usually that outspoken, I think might be the right word, or I'm just not usually that loud on these kind of matters, but um, I had to find a way in because I felt in my heart that these are conversations that need to start, need to be had right now. So here
So
we
you're
are.
speaking up and you're talking about education. You're not talking about preaching or yelling or anything like that. We're talking education. I think
Right.
both your parents were educators, you mentioned. So
Mm-hmm.
tell me a little bit more about what that means. How can you approach this through education? What are some methods, some means, some ideas?
Sure. So I'm going to use that hot button word again. So I'm going to talk a little bit about privilege because I think that's an important word to use in relation to education. So when I talk about privilege, I'm not necessarily talking about the events in a person's life that have given them the opportunities that they have. We all work towards our certain life goals and we should be able to celebrate those, and that's not the word that, or that's not the way I'm trying to use privilege here. So I'm talking about that in like the systematic ways that um, our ground zero levels, our just personhoods, help us to excel or exceed in life. I've had conversations with people that have been hard, but I've told them about my experiences as a Black person, not necessarily in this community, but in or around certain places. Like there was one time that I can remember as a child, um, I was just looking through a rack of magazines at Shopko, and there was a shop attendant who was just following me around. I thought it was creepy and weird, but my mom had later told me why that probably was. And there was also a moment in time where I was driving from my job at a church. I was just driving home, and a police officer had followed me home just wanting to check on me to make sure I wasn't drinking. And I like those are experiences that I've had that maybe someone who was born with a different privilege than I would not have to experience. And so in relationship to the education, I've had conversations with people where I have shared those experiences, and they have told me, well, there is no race problem in America. I have not experienced anything like that. I have not seen anything like that. So it doesn't exist. You're overreacting. And then I am sitting there and I'm like, well, I have experienced those things. And so getting rid of the gap that is privilege, and that's just recognizing that in yourself. And that's not necessarily a word used to make you feel guilty, but it's recognizing that, which allows you to kind of take off those rose-colored glasses and see that other perspective. Like if I saw something the other day online that if someone tells you that there is a racial privilege or a racial gap that they've experienced, it's not any one person's place to tell them that that's wrong. You know what I mean? So it's just listening and trying to engage in that conversation that really opens up the education, and it has to start from good conversation first.
So are those examples of what you would call microaggressions?
Yes, there and microaggressions happen all over the place, and it's not secluded to white people or to Black people or to Asian people. Everybody experiences and perpetuates microaggressions in some way. And it could be just as simple as that one joke your uncle told you, and you thought it was so funny, you tell a friend, and that friend is like, you know what? That wasn't a great joke. And then you say, well, I thought it was funny. I'm going to go tell this other person that. But we kind of have to listen to when people correct us on microaggressions. It's not to embarrass you. It's not to make you feel bad. But sometimes we just don't know that we have them. And so having those conversations with people, if you don't know where to start, is a really good place to start. If you're not ready to have those huge conversations, if you don't know a whole lot about the political sphere, and I will be the first to tell you that I don't know everything, I'm still very new. But if you hear someone say something off color or something that just doesn't feel right, and you want to just say, hey, I don't think you should be perpetuating that kind of stereotype or telling that kind of joke. At that point, what that other person does with it is their prerogative. But at least in that moment, you've done all that you could to stop a microaggression. And a lot of those things that we don't even realize that we have them because of media and just the way that we live in our world. It's perpetuated. It's been a part of our systems and our media for a very long time. So it's not something that's going to go away tomorrow, but it all starts by engagement. So it
And
starts
it all
tiny.
starts now. If we start
Absolutely.
now, we can start to make a difference and have
Right.
the courage to not stay silent. It can feel awkward, but it's really important that, by taking that mirror and having that inner reflection and finding out, am I having microaggressions? And, how do I check my privilege? By examining some of that stuff, it then makes a difference. We can all be allies and support one another, lift one another up, because we are all human beings here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're all experiencing so much right now together, that it's something that we forget that, and it doesn't have to be a competition.
Right, right.
we
Success is not finite, right? Like, I think
right
sometimes the assumption is that there's like a limited amount of success. And so if somebody experiences success, it means that inherently somebody else has to have less success. But that's not how it works. Like there's enough success to go around. There's love and kindness unlimited. And so sprinkle that
Yeah,
everywhere.
right. And just going off of that point, Tina, there, and going back into like specifically the Black Lives Matter movement, there's been pushback and a lot of conversation about why it's called Black Lives Matter. And then there's a conversation about all lives matter, which is inherently true, very, very, very true. But you go back to what you just said. We're elevating and we're shedding a light on a very specific struggle. And that's not to diminish or say that other struggles don't matter. But we have a moment right now where I think it's our job as humans to not only shine a light, but help bring that voice back up with the rest of them.
Right. Elevate one another, because it really is a life and death struggle. And these conversations are important to have, and important to have in a civil manner, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And I think it's momentous that the whole world is not only watching, but participating. That's really kind of what drove it home, is that, you know, we're not just one community in this alone. This isn't just a little hotspot. This is a conversation that has been needing to happen, and now it is happening. And so this is the time where we can start to make those incremental changes.
Absolutely. And I have grown up in Manitowoc my whole life. And it wasn't until I've been working in Milwaukee as an actor on and off for the last 2.5 years.
Yeah, side note, Kevin is an amazing actor. If you
Thank you, Tina. But I've been working down in Milwaukee, and I have been able to, in, you know, a very confined, small way, experience other people of color and hear their experiences. And it's opened my eyes to so much. And being in this community, sometimes we don't see outside of Manitowoc. We keep things so confined into our little bubble here, which is a beautiful bubble, don't get me wrong, but we have to kind of just open our hearts and our minds to sympathizing and empathizing with that struggle that's outside of our community. And by doing so, hopefully we'll make our tiny little community a little bit better too.
Absolutely. I think it makes us stronger the better we are to one another. You know, you were telling me, speaking of theater, you're telling me a story about, you know, sort of a softball aggression that you experienced in a review. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, sure. So before we were talking about microaggressions in theater, which is something that I've experienced in a couple of different ways, but in this specific moment, I was doing a show not too long ago where the reviewer had alluded to the fact that the show wasn't quite accurate because of my race, and my sister and another friend who is also Black were in that show too. And it was really strange because in his review he said the show is affected by the current world we live in, and you will understand that when you see it. And it took me aback a little bit, but then I had to laugh about it because at the time there was nothing else that I could say say or do. But now that those conversations are open again, that my reaction to it at the time might have been a little bit different. But then again, going back to those microaggressions, sometimes we say things and we don't realize the repercussions of it. Like, we just don't, because they're so tiny, but they perpetuate and do so much to somebody.
How do you feel about social media. It seems like it's beneficial to be sharing the stories and the experiences so
Hmm.
that, more people can come to terms with and have an understanding of what you're experiencing.
Right. Social media has played a huge part in the social justice movements that are happening right now. It's really important to engage in some way, and it doesn't have to be a big protest or anything. I'll go back to a social media movement that happened not too long after George Floyd's death, called Black Tuesday. If for those of you who use social media, it was the Tuesday after the incidents that happened, where people would express their support by either sharing a black square or a black box. It's called Blackout Tuesday, not Black Tuesday. Sorry, it's called Blackout Tuesday, where they would black out their profiles with their picture with a black square, and they would just say Black Lives Matter, just to show their support, which was wonderful. But there are a couple of things that happened with that. And I will say, I didn't say this before, Tina, but I'll say it now. There's a couple of things that happened with that kind of backfired a little bit. So um, the hashtag was a really good way for information to get out, resources for people who were either protesting or looking for ways to donate. Well, that hashtag was being clouded by black squares and pushing all that information down. So that information was going away. And then in a more long-term effect, that at some points would be the last thing that someone would do. Like on that Blackout Tuesday, they would post that square and have the hashtag, and then the next day it was back to business as usual. And that's not really fair for me to say because I don't know people's personal lives and what they do to help, but it's really important that to be a good ally, to take that information, and if you believe it in your heart, say that to yourself and believe it, but don't just validate it for yourself, because if you're not taking that belief and you're not putting it out into the universe in some kind of tangible way, it's unfortunately not doing a whole lot. If you're not having those hard conversations, if you're not donating, if you're not
Educating.
exactly, it's it kind of just stops at square one, and that's not how change is going to happen. So that's why I think it's really important to talk about this issue, even in tiny, tiny ways. And it's a hard place to start for people because I know it was hard for me. I'm not a very political person, or at least I haven't been a very political person in my lifetime, but I found ways to become more vocal, both in political and human issues, and be more comfortable with having those discussions. And it started by having a conversation when I was uncomfortable. You know what I mean?
Hmm. And these are big, serious issues, and they didn't just start yesterday. But it
Right.
really is important to find the courage and speak up, even starting small, like you said, like combating a microaggression, educating yourself so that you can have civil dialogue, right?
Hmm.
And every little change contributes to hopefully a bigger systemic change.
Oh, absolutely. And something that I neglected to say before now, just because I'm trying to get people to experience and realize that there's so many ways to help and to be an ally. And one of them is reading. Like, I know there's a lot of people who are homebodies, especially with like this COVID pandemic and all of that stuff, but reading a book, like I went and I bought 12 Years a Slave yesterday, the book, by Solomon Northrop, and I just started reading it, and that's that's an account of, it's a firsthand account of racism in the South. And or slavery, excuse me, it's a firsthand account of slavery in the South. And while we don't have slavery anymore, thank God, that is it's a systematic thing that is a part of our history that we can educate ourselves on, that isn't always spoken about in too much depth, be that in school or anywhere else. And there are a bunch of other resources. And Tina, I should send you a link because I've got links. I've got links.
Yeah,
Yes, I'll
please do.
send you
Send me
some
some links
links.
and I'll include them in the description here.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, because I think it really is important to understand that underlying philosophy too, that even, you know, brought this whole hot mess on.
Right.
You know, and speaking of book recommendations, I just started listening to one. I listened to an audiobook from the library. Our library is amazing, but it's called So You Want to Talk About Race, and it's by Ijeoma Oluo.
Okay.
And I'll post a link to that too. And it's just, you know, really good at helping me understand how to take a hard look and understand what the issues are. And, you know, really from my position, being an ally and not staying silent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Yeah, you should send me that. Send me that
Oh,
link so I can
I
look at
will.
it. I've got books coming out the butt over here. Um I just bought this book. Sorry, now I'm tangent. But this is a memoir. It's called How to Be Black. The title's actually white, but but I bought this, and it was recommended by someone on TikTok, which is a social media platform that I use. So not all social media is bad, people. There there's a lot of good stuff happening, especially in response to what's going on right now. I've
And
learned
I really think
so
social
much.
media is helping us to have this conversation, right? To even be aware of what's going on. Without it, we might not even be connected to the greater conversation.
Right, right. And going off on social media again, I've had a lot of hard conversations on social media too, um, that are again tough to have because they're with friends or people that I've known for a while, and um, it's hard to have conversations like this online, and we've all experienced that in one way or another. But I think it's important to still try to have them, especially now that since we can't always meet up with people. Um, it, and open yourself up to hearing something that you might not agree with. This is a good point. I was having a conversation with one of my really good friends the other day, and I was talking to them, and I was just instead of listening to what they were saying to me, I was formulating an argument to what they were saying.
Oh,
That that isn't how we have good conversation, especially during this time. Now, people will say things to you that you might not necessarily agree on, and but listening and receiving that conversation doesn't make you sympathetic to a view that you don't agree with. It does better you to have an intelligent conversation going forward.
right.
I think that's really important because there's a lot of cancel culture, um, in our world right now, and it's just like taking the information someone gives you and immediately shutting them down. And that's a really hard mindset to take ourselves out of, but I think that's really important.
It goes back to education. You know, if you can
Mm-hmm.
hear somebody's side, if you can process that, it doesn't mean that you have to respond right away. But by understanding, but at least taking that information in, you can maybe start to connect your thoughts in a different way.
Oh,
But you're right. If you're
absolutely.
just ready to fire back with something that cancels it out, that's not productive.
Mm-hmm. It's tough. It's tough to do because we were having a pretty deep conversation about things that I don't necessarily agree with, but I think hearing his thoughts not only affirmed my belief, but it helped me understand where he was coming from. And then from there we could have that dialogue. And it's hard to, because sometimes you want to change a person right then and there, but that's not how it works sometimes. So
Oftentimes not. It takes that
yeah.
civil dialogue and then letting it simmer, right? You know,
Exactly.
Kevin, you were talking about a beautiful event that happened recently where you felt like there was kind of a good exchange and there was a feeling of love and joy. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I would love to. So I think this was just last weekend. I'm pretty sure.
On Blur's
Maybe
Day?
2 weekends ago. Yeah. Yeah, right. What day even is it right now? But it was a community barbecue that happened at Washington Park. The organization that put it together was, at the time, was called Together We Rise. And currently, they/we, because I've since joined the effort, has changed the name to Lake Shores United Visionaries, or LOVE for short. um
Nice.
yeah. So they put together this community barbecue that was really just meant to bring people together from all across the city, from all different backgrounds. And that's exactly what it did. And there was so much joy experienced in those moments. I was so happy to be a part of this community, of just people experiencing life and exchanging times, uh, together. And there was music and dancing and delicious food. And there were kids from as young as 2, 3 years old, even kids in a strollers still, and there were a few older people too, and there were COVID masks worn by some, because we can't make everybody do that, but or we should try at least. um and I've
I think
just
bringing up
never.
kids, oh,
Oh, no, go ahead.
God, sorry. You mentioned kids, and I think that that's a really important place, especially to be having these conversations and
Mm-hmm.
the education, like you were talking about, right? If kids
Absolutely.
can learn how to approach the world full of love and embracing their fellow man rather than being divisive, man, we'd be in a better place.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. um it really does start there, because sometimes these, like I'm going back to media. I'm so sorry. I'm all over the place now.
You're
But
great.
going back to media, like, there are some things that you observe, especially as a kid, because you're taking all this information in, and that it comes back out again as you grow older, and you don't necessarily realize where it comes from. So taking and being an active role in that education, whenever and wherever you're able to, is very important. And I think especially about um, exposing people of color to educational roles, where I've often been the only Black guy in a room in an education setting, and that's not necessarily anyone's fault. But just realizing that there are those opportunities, and even just being in a room with someone. And I I used to teach music in middle school, in a middle school, and there was a probably a kindergartner or first grade that asked why I was so dark. Now, they don't that I wouldn't really call that a microaggression. That's just a kid being curious. But instead of, saying something stupid like, "Oh, they just baked me longer," which is kind of a stupid thing to say. Um, and I've heard it said before. I just explained to them that I'm Black, and that's just how I am. And that was that. And they accepted it, and we moved on. So it really can be that simple.
And so that really does come down to education. I lived in Japan for 3 years as an English teacher. And I remember one day in my third year, one of my students said, Tina Sensei, don't you like Japanese food? And I said, oh, I love Japanese food. I eat it every day. And then she looked at me earnestly and she said, so why are your eyes still blue? And so, it's kind of that same sort of thought that you know, that there's, you know, baked too long or based on the food that you eat. Like, no, it's just who we are.
Right, right. And like talking about that stuff with children is sometimes is what I've been told to what I've been led to believe is conversations that you're not supposed to have. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Um,
But don't you think
but
they're
have
more
them.
important? Yeah.
Yeah, but have them because that in the long run will change a lot too.
Difficult doesn't always mean bad. Just
Right.
means having the courage to do it. And these times are important. So,
Mm-hmm.
Kevin, we were talking about a celebration before. I think there's an upcoming celebration, right? A Juneteenth
Yes. A
commemoration.
Juneteenth. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's this coming Friday, June 19th, at Washington Park. So it's gonna start at 4 p.m. And the whole point of the celebration is just to bring the community together, not only to celebrate, but to educate about Juneteenth, which is the last day, June 19th, 1865, where the very last of the Black slaves were emancipated in the South. So it's been a big Black holiday, celebrated in many different communities, but we're bringing one to Manitowoc. So we're going to be sharing, we're going to be reading the Emancipation Proclamation. There's going to be some spoken word and some poems, then some testaments and speeches from a couple of people outside of the community coming in and sharing their time with us. There's going to be strawberry soda served at the event,
Oh,
which is a delicacy that's given out at Juneteenth. And then we're also going to be doing some voter registration. So it's going to be a good time for especially teens who have just turned 18 to get registered or to check if you're registered and get some information on important elections coming up and all of the candidates. And I mean all of the candidates. We're not trying to perpetuate one side over the other, but just giving out information. So at least you're registered and you're voting, because that is an important civic duty.
there you go. And everyone is welcome to attend Juneteenth.
And everyone is welcome. And so it's starting at 4 and it's going till about 7. And we will be having these stations spread out around Washington Park. So it'll be really easy to social distance if you still have concerns about social distancing. And then there will be a few times where we as a group will be able to come together and experience speeches and things together as one group. So that'll be really cool.
So, a great opportunity for celebration, commemoration, education, and
Hmm.
elevation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time to have this really important conversation. I feel like we could keep talking, and, you know, offline we should.
We
And
should.
everyone that's watching, please have these important conversations. And most importantly, do what you can to raise one another up, to be an ally, and love one another. Spread that
Hmm.
around liberally, right?
Absolutely. Very liberally, please. We need it.
All right. Stay safe, Kevin. You are awesome. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Tina.